and all of this fun stuff. So, welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Anthony Bean, and we are here to talk a little bit about gender discrimination in games and what we can actually kind of do about it. And as we know in the community, it's prevalent, and we won't even get kind of stuck on Riot Games and some of the other stuff that happens in some of those very heavy ones. We'll be here for hours. But I am here with a bunch of actually really wonderful people. I want them to introduce themselves a little bit. So let's kind of start with you, Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nicki Line, or therapist Nikki. I have a private practice in Tampa, Florida. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, a certified sex therapist, as well as a geek therapist. So,
Yeah, you are. You're a certified geek therapist. You're right. All right, Megan.
Hello, I am Dr. Megan Connell. I'm the co-founder of Geeks Like Us. I'm a licensed psychologist, board certified, and I hit my microphone because I talk with my hands. I'm in physical practice in Charlotte, North Carolina, but virtually in North Carolina, Virginia, Washington, and soon to be a whole lot of other states if I can just finish my side pact. I've been working on it for a while. I'm also certified geek therapist, certified superhero psychologist, therapeutic game master. I'm the host of a live play D&D show called Clinical Role, where all of my players are other therapeutic game masters or psychologists. I'm also the host of the Brain Noodles podcast, where myself and other psychology-minded folks talk about just all the things that our brains noodle on. My favorite topic that we have is talking about planners and why we love them and hate them. And that's what I do.
We're gonna have a lot of questions about those planners and why you love them, why you hate them, because I feel like that's a whole thing on its own.
Oh, it is.
How about you, Steph?
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Stephanie Orme. I'm a professor of communication and media studies at Emmanuel College in Boston. I research game culture and geek culture kind of broadly, and have a particular focus on gender and diversity inclusion in video game culture and geek culture more broadly. So I'm jazzed to be here.
And last but not least, Angela.
Hello, I'm Angela Locashio. I am a trauma-informed educator and a certified sex coach, and I work with women, transgender, non-binary, intersex, gender non-conforming folks. Specifically, I really love working with neurodiverse folks, and even more specifically, sensory processing disorder and ADHD. And I am in the process of becoming a certified geek specialist.
Yeah, you are. I think you come to almost all of our live ones, if I'm not mistaken.
I try. It's right before they're usually right before our D&D session on Saturday, so it's like in and out.
So we are here to kind of talk a little bit about gender discrimination in games, and I kind of want to give it to the floor first of all. Is what are we talking about when we actually say the phrase gender discrimination, and how does it kind of show up either outside of the world but also inside?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, discrimination can be as benign, if you can call discrimination benign, right? But as seemingly mild as stereotyping people, or name calling based on one's gender and stereotypes about gender, to some of these more egregious things like Dr. Bean alluded to earlier, the kind of stuff that often goes on at like places like Riot Games, right? Or harassment in game spaces or in gaming workplaces. So I would say anything that is meant to exclude populations of people, right, based on their gender categories.
Anyone else want to kind of like jump in on that? I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, you nailed it really well. I
Yeah.
think with the idea of the gender categories. But what do we kind of see it as? How have we all been? I'm not going to talk about myself as a male being discriminated against, but how have we kind of been discriminated against in games or outside of it? Like what for like the people that are watching, what does it look like? What does it feel like?
for me, I was doing like research earlier today, and I was thinking back when I was a kid, and that's like in the 80s. when I saw gender represented in games, what did it feel like? And it felt like nobody really looked like me. It felt like it was very stereotypical of what you would see in comic books or magazines or Vogues, and nobody really looked like me. And then I remember Mortal Kombat, I think it was 2, when Shiva came out, because I was always like a more bulkier kid and had more muscle mass and stuff. And I went, I could probably relate more to her as a character, which is bad because that's like a half dragon, half humanoid, almost monster, to even feel like I related to a character in video games.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't fit that stereotype of what it means to look like and be a girl in our society, you definitely didn't connect with what you see on video games. And I'm saying this in the past, but it's still really prevalent today. You go on a video game and your choices are very limited of what you can be. A female looks like this and a male looks like this. So it's not just discrimination against females when it comes to the looks of characters. We're still very much in that stereotypical phase of boy girl, and people are calling out and saying we want more than this.
Mhm. Well, and I think too, like I forget which one of the many books behind me here it was. I was going through and counting the number of female looking villains versus male looking villains versus inhuman, just, you know, big gelatinous cubes and things. And it was something like 3 to 1 of female villains to male. And that idea of like, if you're, I was a child of the 80s too. So like, other than, Gem and the Holograms and She-Ra, you were the damsel in distress or you were the evil person. And that was really frustrating. And like, it's changing, but slowly, and there's a lot of talk, of like hags in D&D. It is a very classic kind of trope that comes from people fearing intelligent women and seeing them as as witches and being evil. If you were unmarried and didn't have your own kids, there must be something wrong with you. And that fear and that lore, was adapted into the game. And like, there's a lot of folks that will be like, well, but it comes from our heritage. It's like, yeah, but like that was problematic too. And we maybe need to look at like, how can we create new mythology and new villains and new bad guys to put into the game and to kind of revitalize it.
Yeah, I agree. No, the trope of the monstrous woman, right? Um, Again, like I think certain body types of women that are often represented in those roles too, like they do tend to be, not conventionally attractive, right? Or usually not very thin. And so I think there's this interesting too combination of what's going on there, right? How we stereotype certain types of women and also equate them with these kind of unsavory roles as well, right? And to say like, well, that's representation, it's like, right? But it's not the kind of representation that people necessarily want, right?
It's kind of an interesting thing is that we're not necessarily just talking about the idea of different types of armor on characters within video games. We're actually talking about the actual tropes that are going in play here, the ones that are coming on out and making it seem like women or another type of trope are vulgar or uh, attackish or have to be seen in this type of idea. And obviously, the witches kind of seem like they go back to Salem and all of that stuff, which is a wonderful place to visit if you're ever in there, especially around Halloween. It's
Oh,
the
it's
best.
great.
Oh, it's intense and fanatically amazing. Probably the one of the best places to kind of be there. How does this kind of manifest in, let's say, even sexual harassment? Because Angela is the one who shared this statistics we have up here on the screen here that 77% have experienced gender specific discrimination.
Well, that specific thing that we were just talking about, um, as soon as you bring that into play in a game, the dialogue that begins happening is immediately, it might not be directed at you specifically, but it's telling of how people feel about you and your gender. This is what it means to be a woman, and all of these, horrible things that people have to say, whether it's name calling or it's just flat out really sexual, um, not even innuendos, it's just blatant in your face, sexual comments that come out i- immediately when the character shows up.
I mean,
And go ahead.
oh, I didn't mean to cut you off, Angela. No, I was gonna say, like, I think too, some of these representations are like literally dehumanizing, right? Especially some of like the villains and the monstrous ones we've been talking about, and so it has this effect of, people then internalize those feelings and think that women or other marginalized genders are less than human, right? And will treat them as such, whether that's, again, sexual harassment or some other kind of bigotry.
Well, and it's even like in our core storytelling element, like I'm working on a book right now and I was reviewing again Joseph Campbell's, Cry for Myth and the mythology. And like one of the steps is the woman as temptress.
Yeah.
I I like I'm at the point where I'm like, I'm quoting Campbell, I need to use it. I'm like, can I just freaking change this to hubris test? But like that's just so problematic. It's like, oh, we have to, there has to be that temptress, that sexual side to any female character, and it's like, why? No.
Or even the idea of like a succubus or something like that comes into play. I don't know about you, but I've never seen any sort of male succubus kind of coming into play here that acts the same way as a female succubus is supposed to act according to lore, depending on the game as well.
I mean,
Steph, I'm
incubus
watching
is
you
in
like
the book.
you're
Yeah.
trying to
I'm
find
thinking,
something.
I'm like,
Like you're
oh
trying to
man.
find
Well,
it.
now, now I'm just like, what does a male succubus look like? And I want to
Well, it's
know.
the incubus.
Yeah,
It's in the monster manual.
yeah,
It's in
Oh,
there.
okay, it's in there.
Yeah.
it's
Oh.
an incubus, and I've seen something similar like in dating sims because I've been playing a lot of dating sims lately for a different stream, and even then, like the stereotypes for them, it's no, it's bad.
Interesting.
So according to like say the 2014 survey, this is the one that's like really heavily referenced everywhere on the International Game Developers Association. The results showed that women actually claimed insubordination from subordinate male colleagues. Now, Steph, I think that this is a little bit more of your area specifically, if I'm not mistaken. But I think that that kind of plays a lot of the roles, even in the games industry. We're seeing a push right now to have a little bit more of a female leadership because if you look at it, even within the past year, we've seen a big discrimination against women being in high places of power because of either fear-based or they're seen as second-class citizens within the actual game industry.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's really sad if you look at employment statistics based along gender, as well as race and other categories in the global games industry. But yeah, looking at North America in particular, I mean, it's what you often hear, predominantly white, male, cisgender, heterosexual. Many of them don't have children. And the whole work culture gets structured around that particular kind of worker, right? It's like the ideal vision of a worker. And one of the sad realities is that a lot of women or non-binary or trans individuals, right, might like even opt out of going into the industry because of hearing about these horror stories of harassment and again, being called insubordinate for daring to kind of push back against maybe legitimately bad ideas, right? That some of their higher ups are trying to advocate for. And again, there's so much research that's been done on this. You can find these stories, and I've seen a lot of people report that many marginalized gendered individuals will last maybe 5 years in the industry in some of these cases before just kind of tapping out because it's so bad. And so we're starting to see a lot of these people actually go into indie games development where you can kind of, be your own boss in a sense, right? And create your own small team of people who are sort of on the same page as you and that can build an inclusive and welcoming and affirming work culture. So to me, I feel like that's where we're seeing a lot of representation in terms of developers coming from, which is great, but it's also kind of sad that they feel shoved out of the AAA kind of major studio space as well. So yeah, just some things I was kind of thinking about as you were talking about that, Anthony. Absolutely.
I've heard of some individuals as well, when they were going to be, into school to do game developing, that they decide to quit the school or that particular major because of the discrimination that they get from teachers
Yeah.
or from fellow students. So they're just like, no, I think I'm going to just change my major completely, or I'm just going to quit this school because of the gatekeeping and the pushback that they get there. And that's awful.
To hear that coming from teachers is incredibly disheartening. I
Yeah,
had not
the
heard that in
institutions
particular.
institutions of learning where we're supposed to be like teaching about this stuff, and it's pushed within the idea of how every business, not to get on a CRT or a critical race theory type thing here. We're not going to go down that path. But it does have a similar systemic issues within a lot of different work environments. Of the idea that women are there to be sexualized objects. Taxes, when we tend to go to those ones, it's being right way of phrasing it, being deemed in some cases an issue with booth babes, I think is the name's what it's called, of
Yep.
creating a demeaning culture of women on a lot of levels, of trying to get some of the nerdy geek culture people to come on in because they sexualize the women to come to the booth, and they use it in that capacity. And what does that do to continue the demeaning language and ideas of this?
I think
Yeah.
that kind of rolls into what Angela was saying earlier about fan service, about how it just perpetuates that sexism and where women are sex objects versus for people.
Right.
Actually, real
And
people. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of the research is showing that there is a strong correlation between the harassment that happens in games and domestic violence. And so they've started. There's actually, I cannot remember her name right now. I think her last name is Gordon. Um, and she actually did created a video game to use in the workplace to teach people about harassment, and she did that based off of studies that she did on workplace harassment, video game harassment, and how that played into domestic violence. And you can see based on the language. So let's going back to looking at the villains. How do we treat this person? So we over sexualize this person, and I say over because it's okay to sexualize in a way, right? Sex is a thing and it's okay to be attracted to, and it's okay to have those feelings. But when it becomes dangerous, like it does, and we have, young people all the way up to whatever age they are playing, and it's okay to have these feelings and to feel like this person is a danger to you, and then you turn around and you bring that into real life, it really affects the problem solving that you have in real life. And so, we're here to talk about what can we do about this in game. If we can figure out a way to problem solve this without that being sexualized, and that means we need to change what these people look like and the options that we have for the clothes that they wear and the language that they use. If we can start doing some of that in game through the creation process of the game, then we're not going to have that subliminal piece there that's happening, and we can start problem solving in game differently, and then take that skill out of game as well.
Well, and I think to the in-game stuff too, like you were talking about the subliminal stuff of like even the mechanics of running in a video game for a male character versus a female character. Like if you ever want to see something just silly and disturbing at the same time, is people who have swapped in the male character and made them run with the female mechanics to show how ridiculous it is and unrealistic. and just even those little things that you don't think about, you don't notice, get in there, and it creates problems.
And it's kind of based upon the images of the game developers as well. And I think that what you're speaking on is the pervasiveness of the culture.
Hmm.
Nikki, I interrupted you. I apologize.
It's okay. And it took, I think, Tomb Raider almost 10 plus years to change Laura Croft as a character to have her proportions be more realistic in stature than what they originally had in the early 90s.
Still one of
Which
my
is,
favorite cosplays of the pyramid boobs on that one, because it's
Oh
just like,
yeah,
this is the best thing ever. Like, who does this?
that was so good. But
Yeah.
also like with Laura Croft, like the bummer there was like, and like Angela was saying, right? It's totally fine to like to sexualize in an appropriate way, right? Individuals and to like acknowledge sexuality. But I think most of us can agree the way that like Laura Croft was done in the 90s was kind of gross and inaccurate, right? And problematic. But she was like one of the only like visible women in games in terms of
Yeah.
games representation for the longest time, right? So it's like if you wanted to kind of connect or relate to a female character, like that's who you had, right? And I think that's a problem, right? So you have these like really limited options in terms of representation, and then when they're problematically represented, then young girls like me felt just kind of shut out, right? And I don't know, growing up I always like, I think it says a lot about me even today, but I always connected very strongly with male characters in all kinds of media because there were more of them and I thought they were more interestingly written, and a lot of other things. But so it's not inherently bad, but it would have been nice to, like Nikki was saying earlier, have someone who I felt like I personally kind of connected to and looked like and acted like.
I haven't played Cyberpunk, but I've heard a lot of good things about the character creation in Cyberpunk. Like there's thousands of ways. Like you can spend hours just creating your character and how the body is shaped and the hair and everything. This I know it took friends of mine like 3 hours just to make their character because of all the combinations.
I am totally that person. My husband makes fun of me. He's like, have you even started playing? And I was like, this is playing 5 hours later. Like,
Yeah, when you have all those options for the first time ever.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
It's
Where,
exciting.
where, Megan, I don't know if you're the right one to kind of bombard you with this question, but what about in, let's say, even the board games area? You're very well versed in board games as well. Where do we
Mhm.
see this type of culture? I can think of a couple games right off the top of my head that that type of tropes are still technically used, but
Oh yeah, I mean it's really interesting because yeah, there's definitely a lot of games where there's a lot of tropiness still within them, but I've been drawn more and more to games that are deliberately trying to be counter to it. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name. It's one of my husband's favorite role-playing card games that we have now, but in the game though there are representations of all races, all genders, and all body sizes, and that you can choose what you're going to be, and it's really what they really worked hard to be inclusive. And I'm so sorry I can't remember the name of it. I'll try maybe Google it before we're done. But yeah, there's been a lot of problems, and especially specifically in tabletop gaming, I was talking about, lots of times the evil character is female, and one of the things that just bothers me so much about D&D is in the whole pantheon and whole world of Dungeons and Dragons, they have one culture that's a matriarchy, and it's chaotic evil and horrible and the worst place you could ever imagine being. And it's like, come on, guys, do better, do more. Because yeah, the drow are fun and it's an interesting culture and scary, but that's it.
Yeah.
I think we've seen a lot of DMs start to change the ideas of that too, and gender swap a lot of the different cultural and matriarchs
Mhm.
based upon what the players have been wanting as well. Where do we
Yeah.
kind of see that happening a little bit in games?
I was actually thinking about this when we were talking about the character customization, because I know a discussion that's come up among like feminist video game scholars is, these customization options are really awesome, but do they also sort of let developers off the hook in a way? Like, okay, if I want, a larger woman in a game, I have to put that in there myself and create it and be my character. And they're not necessarily an NPC or, my God, never like the main playable character that you're forced to play as. And it's kind of interesting to think about, right? Like I love being able to customize characters that look like me, but I'm also like generic blonde white girl, right? So it's not that hard to see myself in a game. Um, but yeah, especially when we talk about, I know we're talking about gender, but like racial issues as well. Um, I do wonder if games and giving so much agency to players does, um, like I said, like let developers kind of get a pass, right? Instead of having to design those full, fleshed out, diverse characters and cast members themselves, which I would like to see done. And there are some studios that do it. I think one of my favorites is BioWare. They're not perfect, but I think in terms of diverse representation, they do a better job than most, putting women characters in strong leadership roles, not just evil witches, but also like leaders of the armies and really powerful monarch figures. So yeah, just some thoughts that I was just kind of having as I was listening to the discussion about the tabletop stuff as well.
Well, that brings up a good point about, and we were kind of talking about this before we jumped on. The whole marketing is all about fan servicing, and it's been very much directed to the white male heterosexual cisgender person forever. But what we're seeing is there's this shift. There's a shift in the market, which means there's a shift in the fans. And, Megan, you said earlier that change is happening very slowly. And as that happens, and people who do not fit that model start speaking up, then we have other people who feel very uncomfortable. Oh, you're encroaching on my space. This is my safe space, and you're encroaching on my safe space. And then we start having these arguments amongst people of what the safe space is. Who are we going to market to? We have these big companies who don't want to market to somebody else for fear of losing fans. That's where we can have outside of the game, whether we play these games or not, whether we're a woman, a man, anything in between on the gender spectrum, there's so much that we can do as far as being aware of what companies are starting to make these changes and start listening to them, paying more attention to them, investing in them, and that's going to force the market to change.
Sometimes it has to come from the actual players themselves to do it. We can do research, we can do all these other types of ideas. Sometimes it really requires the fan base, the player base, to step up and be like, we don't want this anymore. This is ridiculous. Let's change this type of ideas. Where does what for the viewers and everything like that? What would we consider to be kind of like sexist behavior? It's a harder question because I mean, it's like, which list do you want to start with?
Yeah,
that's a big question. I mean, like, I feel like this is a story that's appropriate. I've told this one a few times. Like, the Sunday D&D game I play in, like, pretty early on, there was a player who joined, and then like they were doing something bad in a town, and like that player said, like, I rape an NPC to death, and I was just like, wow. I almost quit the game then. I'm glad I didn't, because like my DM was a brand new DM, didn't know what to do. The person who did that was a friend of theirs, and like they processed and talked about it and both apologized to me and have talked about like what were the things that led up to something like that being said. And there's just and like I've gotten to talk with the player who did it and like moved on from it. But I think it's a worthwhile discussion because like it was something that made me really uncomfortable. And like even though it wasn't something directed at me, I was the only girl in the group. Everyone knew I was a girl because we were on voice. and it was incredibly uncomfortable. And like that's, part of what sexual harassment and harassment at the table can look like. It doesn't have to be directed at you, it can be directed at another character, but it's like it's like that reminder of the power differential and the bad things that can happen. And like, was it the stat is like 95% of all rapes are women, and of that I think it's like 60% are under the age of 18. I might be getting my stats wrong on that, but like it, it's not a cool thing to bring up. Like, I don't know, I'm there to play games and slay dragons, not be reminded of the real world horrible things.
Well, I think often too, like people, they say those and they're not even thinking about the implication, like, what they're actually describing because they don't have to, or they don't think they
Yeah.
have to, right? Whereas, like, you're right, like, this is like something that is a very legitimate concern and fear of many women and other people. And to have it thrown around in such a like casual, kind of callous way, yeah, no, that would have been awful. Like, I, like literally the face, my whole body like tensed up when I heard you describing
Yeah.
that, because I think like you're right, even being the only woman in that space, it was probably like a really isolating experience as well. And it just, I'm sorry you had to even experience that.
It's not a good way to start off a D&D group.
No, no. But
No.
and I think it's other things too of like checking your own behaviors of like, are you listening to the people around the table? Like, a term I learned when I was part of another media company was man-peating, which is where you say something and it gets ignored, and then someone who happens to have a Y chromosome says the exact same thing, and everyone pays attention to it and says it's such a brilliant idea. Um, like being aware, is that happening in the game that you're playing, whether it be a video game or tabletop game. It's such a just difficult experience, and trying to correct all of these ingrained and learned behaviors really is hard, and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
One of the things, I actually just saw a video on this not long ago that was actually talking about this exact same thing, because there are things that we can talk about in games, and I mean, that's the whole point of geek therapeutics, right? It can be very therapeutic, and you can actually have these conversations and problem solve a lot of different things in game with consent. And there can be this whole thing up front, even before session 0, where you could take a Google form and ask questions of what's okay, what's not okay, like a yes, no, maybe kind of exploration of your characters, so that you know what's okay in game and what's not okay. And I think normalizing that and having that be a huge part of it, the game developers can actually create that and have it available, readily available, not hard to find, not in some obscure link, but readily available, discussed for people who are new, who are coming in. And that's normal. That's just a normal way that we play the game, is we have these consent conversations before it even starts. And that would be huge.
Yeah,
I'm thinking when you play in schools, right? Like, I'm a former middle school teacher, and the after school program, and you have the geek club that they're going to come in and they're going to play games, and you have these, awesome 12-year-old boys and the two LGBT students who come in on somewhere on the gender spectrum, and they come in and then immediately they leave the game because these conversations aren't happening. You can get it right there at the source when it starts, having these conversations in our schools from the institutions. I would like to see that. I would like to help make that happen.
Mhm. Well, and actually, Monty Cook, they put out a source called the Consent in Gaming, which is a free PDF. You just have to like add it to your cart, and then you get the link to download it. But one of the things that they did is, after that came out, their books that are going with it, their cipher system, in the last page of those books is a consent form that you can photocopy and give to all your players before session 0, that has red, yellow, green on all the topics that are in that module type book, which I hope more and more companies choose to do something like that when they publish modules, is to give those consent forms that you can hand out to your players before you even start.
That's really cool. Yeah, because like we were saying, I think Angela, you mentioned like you knew people who had done this on sort of an individual level. Like I know someone who does this in a campaign, but yeah, it's not, it'd be awesome to see that like included in the like official from the developers, you know, from the people who come up with the game system, to include that. And I love what you said about like just making it like normal, like it's just part of it, like a character sheet or anything else you fill out, instead of like something that some people choose to do that's extra. I think that's really, really cool. And the same, you know, just adding on to about the role that like education and school clubs can play in building these, you know, inclusive environments. I'm really involved with esports programs at my institution and other colleges in the area. And one of the big pushes that I'm making is to, you know, make this not just another team of 12 cis boys, which is like what it tends to be. You know, and I get asked all the time, like, how do you do that, right? People are always like, how do we recruit? We need women, is like what they say. And I'm like, that sounds weird. Don't say it that way. But like, first of all, but it's, you know, and it's tricky because, you know, I think it starts with you first start building a culture, right? You build a team culture, a group of people that are going to really seriously commit to not just tolerating individuals, not just being like, yeah, you can be here, and if something happens, you know, like then we'll intervene, but like actively inviting and welcoming and reaffirming people's different gender identities in those spaces. So anyway, there's a whole lot that can be said about that. But yeah, again, just thinking of like the classroom and school clubs as being places and these geeky spaces where I think we can really start fostering and making a norm these kinds of practices that like we've been discussing. Absolutely.
Yeah, I like the idea of making that safe space from the get-go. So you are not afraid to call out behavior that's not okay. So you can just make it part of that culture, like this. Having somebody who's masculine presenting or female presenting to anybody who's making a statement, go, that's not cool and that's not needed here. So you can start to weed out some of the man-feeding or mansplaining. I know that's stereotypical in of itself, but
Yeah.
type of negative behavior.
What was it like for if either one of you four have ever stepped inside of a game store for the first time? What was that like to kind of be there? I know Megan, you shared a story from a friend and everything, but what was it like for your experience to step into there? Whether it was like joy and everything, like walking around and be like, oh my god, there's Star Wars stuff up here. Oh my god, there's video game things over there. And then how were you treated the first time you were thrust in there?
I'll say, like, anytime I walk into a new game store, there is a combination of giddy excitement of like, oh boy, what big thing am I going to find that I'm going to want to spend all my money on in here? And also is this going to be the time when it's going to really, really suck? Um, I can say though, like, personally had wonderful experiences at all the game stores locally that I've gone to, gaming conventions, everything. It's been wonderful. But there's so many horror stories out there of people behaving badly. And the story I was sharing before we went on stream was a friend of mine who's a board game designer went into a game store to look at their board game and just to kind of have that moment of pride of seeing it on the shelf and like, I did it. And they went in and the person running the store is like, I know why you're here. And they're like, oh, do you? And brought her over to the earrings that were the D20 earrings. I'm like, nope.
I can't. Which like there's nothing wrong with like wanting geeky earrings, right? But like to
No.
assume that that's what they came in for, that's the issue, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
if I had my ears pierced, I'd want geeky ear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I went to game stores a lot as a kid. And as a kid, like I don't know, nobody really like paid you any mind, but I still like today, you know, it's still awkward. Same thing that Megan was saying, especially if it's a new store, it's like, all right, are these people gonna be cool, or like is it gonna be weird? Am I going to kind of get like, kind of gatekeeping kind of vibes, right? But I think one kind of funny story that happened was actually when I was a doctoral student and I was doing a project actually about women's experiences in game stores. I previously published about like women going to comic book stores and there's like related stuff, but I was kind of interested in delving into game stores and like what kind of gatekeeping practices like women experience and stuff. And it was also for a class we were supposed to like immerse ourselves in the space of our environment, of our subject or something like that, right? So like kind of ethnographic. So I stalked like a game store for a while. It was kind of uncomfortable, but anyway. So I remember like going in there and I wanted to try and set up an interview with one of the store manager, like one of the people who worked there, and they were all men. And I'm there and he was like working, talking to a customer. So I was like, I'll just browse some games and wait for an opening. And he came over and I forgot what had just come out. It was around the time when Overwatch had come out. It was a new Destiny game or something, I don't know. And he starts talking to me like, oh, can I help you? Like, can I make recommendations? I was like, no, I'm good. And immediately starts like explaining stuff to me like about this like game that I was looking at. And I wish right now I could remember what game we were talking about, because I was like, oh yeah. And then showing off here, but I like pulled out some statistic from that company's like first quarter stock. Like there's like how their stocks were doing based on their first quarter sales. And I was like, oh yeah, no, it's been a pretty interesting year for them, with like the release kind of bumped up their shares or whatever. And he was like, what? Just like not what he was expecting. And it was just like he ended up being a really nice guy, but it was just, and we did an interview and all that, but I thought it's such a like telling experience about like his assumptions about me when I came in and I'm being like, oh no, son, like I know my way around video games. Like it's what I do. So yeah, even like as someone who studies this stuff for a living, and in my 30s, like still that self-consciousness and knowing that I'm going to be subject to like weird interactions like that. Like it never goes away. But yeah, there's at least one kind of funny story I have out of it.
Well, it's a whole process of going into a game store. Honestly, I think more about what's going to happen when I go into a game store than I think about what's going to happen when I go into a sex product store. I don't think twice about it. I'm not worried about what's going to happen when I get in there. No questions, whatever, everything's gonna be fine. I feel perfectly comfortable and don't even think about it. But I'm gonna go into a game store by myself. I'm like, what's gonna happen? Who's gonna be in there? How are they gonna be looking at me? Am I going to have to explain myself? That is bizarre. Let's face it, that's bizarre. And that needs to change. That really needs to change. But how often when you go into a game store, is there a female who's working? How often is there a gay individual who's working? Of course, you can't know that just by seeing somebody, but it's generally a cisgender heterosexual male. What, 9.5 times out of 10 when you go into a game store, and that shows you the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we do to get people who really love games, who would love to have that job, who want to be there, to feel comfortable and to have that as a safe space?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's also the issue too of, for women or people who are not the cis white male working at a game store, of how the customers treat them too, which is within the community that we need to do. But no, we all need to do better and do more. I read this interesting story on Reddit the other day of a woman walking down the street and passed by like a fraternity party with a bunch of drunk guys on the porch, and one of them wolf whistled at her, and she said two of the other guys turned around and were like, no, Michael, we do not whistle at women. That's not what we do, ma'am. We are so sorry. He's going inside. He's not allowed to be out here and interacting with the public anymore. Right.
But that's like what we need. That's
That is, it's
exactly,
exactly what we
yeah.
need. And I share that story because it's encouraging. Like those are the little stories that we're starting to get that are showing there's a shift in the, not just the gaming culture, but society at large. And like it is becoming a better place. And like it- for game stores, like when I go in and I talk with them before I recommend any of my clients to go into one, I have a long talk like, how do you deal with people on the spectrum? How do you deal with people who have impulse control issues? What do you do if somebody is being sexually inappropriate? And that can be meaning they are talking inappropriately, they're bringing up inappropriate conversations. Because, like, my therapeutic groups are for all identified female clients. And that's like, I'm not going to recommend them to go to a game store where they're going to get harassed. And, like, really pushing that. And like I'm lucky too because the two game stores near me are owned by couples, and so it shifts between the husband and wife who's the manager on duty. uh so like I feel a lot more comfortable recommending them, but not everybody has that.
I love that you do that for your clients. That's really awesome, actually, to have like a screening process in place. And I guess like something I've done is like once we find like we do, my husband and I like comic book stores and stuff more than game stores because actually interestingly, um, I know a lot of people have started they buy games and they buy comics online, like digital
Mhm.
versions. You can avoid the game store altogether, which is like kind of sad in its own right. Because I like the idea of a game store, even if like the experiences aren't always great. But yeah, I think like giving, if I go to a game store or a comic shop or whatever, and the people there are really cool, and I've had multiple good experiences. Like there was one in the town where I went to grad school. Amazing guys, like super affirmative. They found out I did like feminist media studies and would like recommend comics. They're like, you would be so into like this, like it's kick ass, like gender diversity. They were amazing. And so we would like tell all our friends, like, this is a safe environment for you to go to, like where you don't have to worry, and if a customer shows up and is being a jerk, like they would kick them out. So I think like having a list of those spaces, even for your clients, I think is awesome. But even just like for my friend group or for my students, being like, this is one that I've vetted, that I can vouch for, like they're good people. And it's again, it sucks that like we even have to do that. Like, can't people just be decent to begin with? But I think that is a small sort of actionable step that like a lot of us can take in the meantime.
I actually really love that idea because you're supporting your community, right? So these small game stores, I sounded like I was bashing all of them. I love the game stores. I could spend my whole life in the game stores. Um, so they're really important to our community. And I mean, 2020 killed them, just killed them. So we could support our communities and also support our clients by having a list that's compiled. And here's a whole group of people. Um, thank you to Geek Therapeutics, um, across the states, where we could all compile a list from trusted individuals for people to go to. I think that is a really huge step in the direction of making a change.
And it's something that we can absolutely do and post on the website for people to do that. We obviously, Megan, it sounds like you might have a pretty good vetting process in some capacity that could be utilized in this type of idea. And it brings us to like the other aspects of kind of what we're doing with this talk is what can we do? How can we help reduce this type of stuff? We're talking about cultural change. We're talking about going in the communities. What are some other things that we can do, or when we see it happen right in front of us, when it becomes an issue for not just us, but for the other people around us as
I think a big adage is be the change that you want to see. Advocate for it when you see it. You see it, say something. Talk to other people too. If they're having issues, like, well, say something. You don't have to sit there and have the bystander syndrome. It starts with one person and can have a huge chain reaction.
Mhm. And I think in addition, I would say to what Nikki's saying there is not just to call out the bad behavior, but highlight the good behavior. When you see somebody being awesome and just how they do things, like highlight that stuff and talk about it.
I was just telling someone, a colleague of mine the other day, that I do feel like there is change happening, especially among the younger generation of players. I teach courses on gaming, college courses on gaming a lot, and every semester, so there's always like a unit on gender and diversity, but it's something I like address throughout because that's just like who I am. And it used to be like I would come in and I have to like give myself this pep talk, like, okay, it's gender and diversity day, here we go, you're gonna have to like prove to them it's real, and or that like racism is real and sexism is an issue, because my classes are usually male dominated, right? My current institution, there's actually just more women in general, which is pretty rad. But anyway, so yeah, it was always like I'm gonna have to prove to all these white boys, right, that like this is a problem. And there's a little bit of that the first couple of years, and every year since, that fight has become less and less, to the point where it's gotten where like I come in the last couple of semesters, I'm like, here we go, all right, trans rights and all these things, and my kids are like, well, duh. They're like, of course. Like, yeah, treat people like people. And I'm like, okay, we're good talk. Like, it's been really refreshing, but it's like, okay, so like something is happening, right? Again, like I think big cultural changes were like, we're starting to catch up, right? And they're already coming in like understanding that these things matter. And so to say like, okay, cool, take that feeling and let's carry it into these gaming spaces and these other geeky spaces and spread some of that attitude, right? In places like, calling out individuals who are problematic or highlighting the ones who are doing really awesome things. So I do feel heartened by what I'm seeing just among, my students as sort of a small sample, because it used to be pretty defeating a lot of times. So I do think, like we said earlier, getting better still has a lot of ways to go.
Yeah, in some of the research that you look at, you see this can't do attitude that's been happening. And I don't know if y'all watch Big Mouth, but I love Rick on there, and he's like, what are you gonna do? So you take this guy, and if we can get rid of this attitude that people have and say, you know what, look at this, here's something really cool that happened, now let's have this conversation. And the Black Lives Matter movement has empowered a lot of people to feel more comfortable and safer in speaking out. And if we can move that forward, because this isn't just a gender issue, right? It's all of it is happening together. And when one is strong and supported across the board, then all of us benefit from that. And so if we can take that and move forward and see the positives in that and have those conversations with everybody, right? With everybody in every space that we are in, the conversation becomes normalized and it starts becoming part of our culture overall. The paradigm shifts.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm kind of hearing is the idea of the acceptance of the culture. We're seeing a shift in there, and in my students too. It's a lot easier to teach them about some of these things. But there's always some of those students in that community, like
Oh yeah.
2 years, they're like, well, why are we learning about this? What's the point of this? I'm like, trying to make you learned, man. You've got to finish this. And they're always gonna be a couple, but that's kind of
Always though.
not in the 4 year institution, more in the 2 years is where we see them a little bit. But I do like the idea of one the gaming store initiative, Angela, that you did talk about, and Steph, the one that you just shared in there, the female friendly comic book stores across the United States. Looks like there's about 20 to 30 of them right now, which would be vastly beneficial. It looks like there's nothing in the middle of the U.S. But I'm sure there are
Yeah.
if we took the time to go into them.
Yeah.
But what where can people kind of interact with you and find you guys if you wish to if you want to talk a little bit more about this stuff?
I'm on Twitter at Megan Seide. That's where I'm on there way too much. Also lurking in the Geek Therapeutics Discord, and then the um, Geeks Like Us Discord as well. Actually, I'm not lurking in the gigs. I do interact more there because it is my server. So
You do lurk in ours, but you do pipe in.
I
I
lurk.
appreciate always when you pipe in.
For me, if you look up at Therapist Nikki on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, it might be TikTok too. I'm not sure. But yeah, all the things, or harmonyusinc.com. That's where you can find me.
I'm on Twitter at Stephanie Orme, ORME. Yeah, post post sometimes academic things, sometimes dogs, sometimes nerdy things, bit of everything there.
I feel like Caesar Milan would be very appropriate to be following you, of course, on Twitter.
Mamapistachio.com is my website, and I have a group on Facebook. It's called Awkward Weird Wise. And it is for, I'm just going to say it, it's for anybody who is not a cisgender heterosexual male. Yes, that's exclusive.
I like the name of it, and I'm sad I can't be a part of it, but I still love it.
You know what? You could come in there and give a talk anytime.
Anytime that you would like it, I'm happy to do that.
Right on.
And you can find the rest of us also on Geek Therapeutics on all social media and everything. Hex is on, and the thing is asking about the group, Angela, the Facebook group. Are you following the Twitch stream right now? Are you able to post a link to the
Yep.
group for them?
Yep, I can get in there and do that. Absolutely.
Perfect. So we'll hold off before ending the stream, so we can make sure that we get that in there. So anyone that wants to have that options can definitely kind of get there in there. While she's doing that, are there any kind of like last minute tips that we should probably be looking at for trying to stop the harassment? Obviously, we can't do everything, but we always also try to make sure that we stem and everything we possibly can to help out with a change in the culture, because we're all trying to change something.
I think one thing I would encourage everybody to do is be very conscious of the media you consume, of what games you are playing, what shows you're watching, what movies you're watching. It doesn't take a lot. I feel like, Steph, you probably know this research better than I do, but I think it's like 30 to 45 seconds or even less of exposure to media can change how you think about a topic. And so try to be conscious and like have just, gosh, even use the Bechdel test. Does the movie or show pass the Bechdel test? And demand better. And you can expand the Bechdel test out for people of color, people LGBTQIA, communities. Just think about that, because that changes how you think and approach and see the world.
I guess jumping off of Megan, since it's about being conscious about the media consume, I would say like also supporting media that's created by marginalized individuals whose voices we don't often get to hear, but who tend to do representation right. Or again, there's always a danger of like holding one person accountable for all representation. I remember like Lin-Manuel Miranda has been getting raked over in the Heights, right, for like representation of different skin tones, and I get that criticism, but at the same time it's like, are we being fair in putting all of this on this one guy, right? But yeah, I think in general, finding game devs of color, right, and queer game devs, women game devs, and looking into their work and uplifting that work and recommending it to your friends and helping them create sustainable careers and giving them exposure and exposing yourself to those stories that may not get told as much or as well in mainstream gaming and mainstream media.
And, I was thinking about this actually, Anthony, as you were talking about the guys in your class and having those couple of guys who were just like, rah. And you know what, as a teacher, I kind of got beat up for this, for saying, it's really important that we create a safe space for our white students. It's also very important that we create a safe space for those cisgender heterosexual males to be able to participate in the conversation and not constantly be attacked. So as we're doing this and as we're having those conversations, it's important that everybody feels safe in the space that we've created.
Thank
How
you for
about you,
saying that.
Nikki?
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way of phrasing it, I think. I would love to spend time to like think about a wonderful metaphorical, like, what is it like for you to be in this space? That's what it feels like for everyone else in your space, or something like that. That would be a good metaphorical way of doing it. But Nikki,
I
any
have a
last
really
thoughts?
good one. I'm not sure it's appropriate right now, though. I'll send it to you later.
I mean, like,
Nikki,
I mean, everyone else has said wonderful things, and I like one thing I was thinking was like, just be kind. You know, think about what's gonna come out of your mouth, or the thoughts that are running through your head, and being objective. Like, is that gonna make somebody uncomfortable? Then maybe I don't need to say it.
Gosh, that's
What?
hard when you're impulsive.
Oh, it is. Images of
Engage that
Ryan on the
prefrontal
table again.
cortex. Engage that prefrontal cortex. Come on.
Or write it down first and read it before you say it.
Well, I appreciate the hour you all spent with us here, and we really appreciate your wisdom and insight into this. And thank you all so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
This
you.
is awesome.
All right, everyone, take care and be safe.